Well, well, well. Look at Passion for Sound. He uploaded a video several months ago about how we cannot measure everything we hear, and got the bulk of his argument wrong, at least according to science and actual experts. He found a single paper, then totally misinterpreted that paper, and got his fan base yelling, "Victory!" Not so fast, boys. I'm here, I'm late, but I'm gonna pop your imaginary bubbles. Today, I'm responding to a video that made some pretty wild, outrageous claims about our hearing abilities and audio equipment in general. Look, our ears are amazing, but they're not superhuman, and it's important we understand their actual capabilities based on science and not marketing hype, based upon real information, real studies that have been carried on decade after decade after decade, and not on people like Passion for Sound who simply want to sell you every gear he can get his hands on. I'll be sharing what researchers have actually discovered about how we hear with real studies you can look up yourself, and I encourage you to look those up. In the very first seconds of his video, Passion for Sound says this.
Your ears are way more sensitive than you might have been led to believe.
He then spends the next 27 minutes making absurd claims. The first moment he opens his mouth, he suggests that you have been misled or you have been misinformed, but he is going to tell you the secret to wonderful sound. That's the title of his video, isn't it? There are some very significant exaggerations and unsupported claims which appear throughout his video. For example, here are just the ones that I'm going to highlight. At around 6 minutes, he claims about auditory resolution of 10 to the power of 32 units. Do you know what that means? We're going to find out. A little over 6 minutes, he says that detecting vibrations 100 times smaller than an atom is something possible for your ears. Again, not true, and we are going to talk about that. Around 21 minutes of his video, he claims cable differences causing audible timing issues. Not so much. At a little over 22 minutes, he claims about negative feedback smearing time, maybe a little bit like how he smeared the internet with a lot of bullshit. And a little bit past 24 minutes, he claims about masking of tiny detail signals, maybe the tiny midichlorians running around his head. The most scientifically problematic sections begin around 20 minutes of his video, where he transitions from describing the auditory system, which does in fact contain some accurate information, to making unsupported claims about equipment differences that cannot be measured but supposedly can be heard. He gives you some screenshots of photographs from published papers, or the one paper that he's citing to, I assume, some of which does say what he claims. The correct aspect of his video are limited to describing the biology of the human ear, which is not in dispute, by the way. The simple biology isn't really the problem. But the reason he starts off that way is to get your head nodding along, making you think he's onto something that cannot be debunked. He and his fan base are wrong about that. Now, throughout my video, I'm going to be referencing and quoting a lot of scientific journals and treatises, some textbooks included. They have copyrights, obviously, so I can't show them on screen. However, every single quotation will have a citation, and every single one will be in the description section below. And that is far more than Passion for Sound did. If you scroll down to his description section, he's got affiliate links longer than his list of audiophile myths. Okay, well, maybe not that long. But if you look closely at the very tippy top, he does have a link to an abstract of a paper by Milind Kuchner. The paper is titled The Human Auditory System and Audio. The link Passion for Sound provides does not let you see the full paper, so even if you wanted to read it, you couldn't, at least not from that link. Good thing I found a full copy. It's in a link to my Google Drive where you can download and read it yourself. Again, look at my description section. I also compiled a separate document showing how Passion for Sound incorrectly adapted and twisted what Professor Kunscher says in his paper. That's also linked to my Google Drive, and you should review that as well. But enough beating around the passionate fruit. Let's just get right to it. First and foremost, are our ears really that sensitive? In his video, Passion for Sound claims that our ears have 10 to the power of 32 units of resolution and can detect vibrations, quote, 100 times smaller than an atom. That would be incredible if it were true. Dr. Brian Moore, one of the world's leading experts on hearing from Cambridge University, has written the absolute threshold corresponds to a peak displacement of the basilar membrane of about zero point 0.3 nanometers, which is about the diameter of a hydrogen atom, meaning a atom, about the diameter of one atom, not a diameter smaller than that of an atom, and certainly not a diameter 100 times smaller than an atom, as Passion for Sound would like you to believe. So, what about in plain English? Well, our ears can detect vibrations about the size of the smallest atom, which is impressive to say nothing least. But it's nowhere near the 100 times smaller than an atom claim that Passion for Sound makes. That's like claiming you can see a house from 100 miles away without binoculars. Good luck. Now, as for that 10 to the power of 32 resolution claim, Dr. Andrew Oxenham's research shows something very different. The auditory system encodes information using approximately 30,000 auditory nerve fibers with a dynamic range of about 30 decibels per fiber. This claim of 10 to the power of 32 that Passion of Sound has doesn't really even theoretically track. It's not theoretically possible. Our hearing system is limited by actual physical constraints. So we have about 15,000 sensory hair cells in each ear, connected to roughly 30,000 nerve fibers in total, each with a dynamic range of about 30 decibels. And when you do the math, the maximum theoretical resolution of human hearing falls many, many orders of magnitude below 10 to the 32nd power. Think of it this way. Your ear has about 30,000 pixels of sound information. That's impressive. It's like having a nice HD display. But the video's claim would be also like saying that your phone has more pixels than there are atoms in the universe. It's physically impossible. Your head does not contain that much ability to sense. Or to put it in more simple terms, saying our ears have 10 to the power of 32 resolution units is like claiming you can count every grain of sand on every beach on Earth while simultaneously counting every star in the universe. Our ears are amazing, but they're bound by the same physical laws as everything else in nature. So, what about can we hear what we can't measure? The video's central claim was that we can measure more than we can perceive. In most cases, though, that's wrong. That's at least Passion for Sound's position. But is that actually true? Well, Mayer and Morin tested this directly in their 2007 study, which is actually pretty famous. They said, under controlled conditions, we could not detect differences between the analog output of high-resolution DVD audio recordings and the same signal passed through a 16-bit 44.1 kilohertz bottleneck. What does this mean? They took ultra-high-resolution audio and compared it to standard CD quality. When listeners didn't know which was which, they couldn't tell the difference. This is like claiming you can see the differences between a 16K and 8K TV from your couch, which is not possible. Our equipment can measure these differences easily, but our ears simply cannot detect them. It's also similar to how a digital kitchen scale can measure differences in weight of, say, 0.1 grams, but you cannot feel the difference between 100 grams and 100.1 grams in your hand. Our measurement tools far exceed human perception in almost every area. That's why we invented them in the first place. Claiming our ears can detect what our best equipment cannot measure is like saying you can see stars in daylight that are easily detected by telescopes. Our instruments were specifically designed to extend our senses beyond their natural limits. So, what about do expensive cables sound better? Passion for Sound suggested that cables create timing differences we can hear, but when researchers actually tested this, they found something very different. None of the 16 participants could reliably distinguish between speaker cables ranging from inexpensive 16-gauge lamp cord to exotic audiophile cables costing hundreds of dollars per foot when levels were matched within 0.1 decibels. In everyday terms, what does that mean? Well, when properly tested, people could not tell the difference between basic hardware store wire and fancy cables costing hundreds or even thousands of dollars more. There's another study, by the way, by Lipschitz and Vanderkoy, respected audio researchers, by the way, and they put it plainly. Cable differences, when they exist at all, are at levels far below the threshold of human perception and require sensitive test equipment to detect. Oh, what is that? Sensitive test equipment to detect, meaning that there is sensitive tech equipment available to detect and it is detectable but not by our ears? Seems somewhat fishy. It's like claiming you can taste the difference between water from two identical taps. When tested blindfolded, the differences disappear, don't they? Or it's similar to how people claim they can feel the difference between genuine and synthetic cotton sheets in a luxury hotel, but when the labels are removed, they can't actually tell which is which. The difference exists only in our expectations, not in what our senses can actually detect. How about we can hear microsecond timing differences? The video made a big deal about tiny timing differences between equipment, and let's check what science says. There's a study about that by Blard and Laws. The minimum detectable interaural time difference is approximately 10 microseconds under the ideal laboratory conditions with specialized test signals. That sounds impressive, but there's a catch, because there's another study which follows this one, which talks about something very similar. This study is from Zwicker and Fasto, and they clarify the following. With music signals in typical listening environments, timing differences must be at least 200 microseconds to be potentially audible. What does this all mean in real life? Okay, well, imagine trying to tell if someone clapped their hands 1/5000th of a second apart. Even under perfect laboratory conditions with artificial testing zones and testing tones, the best trained ears can barely detect timing differences of 10 microseconds. With real music in your living room, you need at least 20 times that difference before anyone can hear it. Let's put this kind of in perspective. Light travels at about 200 feet in a microsecond. Passion for sound, that is not in contention. We know it is to be true. Anyway, light travels about 200 feet in a microsecond. The timing differences the video claims you can hear would be like saying you can tell the difference between a light turning on in your living room versus a light turning on 1 inch further away from your living room. The human brain simply doesn't process audio information that quickly, especially with complex music rather than laboratory test tones. It doesn't work that way, guys. Well, does negative feedback ruin sound quality like Passion for Sound was trying to talk about? His video claimed that feedback circuits in amplifiers inherently degrade sound by, quote, smearing time. Smearing time? Interesting. What exactly is feedback in a circuit, by the way? It's actually a brilliant engineering solution. Imagine you're trying to pour exactly 1 cup of water. You'd watch as you pour and slow down as you approach the right amount. That's called feedback. You're monitoring the output, the water level, and adjusting the input, the pouring speed accordingly. In other words, you've got one empty container in front of you, and you've got the glass container with the water, and you're pouring it into the empty container. Once you see that the container is about to get full, you naturally slow down the pouring process. In amplifiers, feedback circuits constantly monitor the output signal, compare it to the input, and make real-time corrections to reduce distortion and keep the sound accurate. Dr. Earl Geddes, a respected audio researcher, states the following about this sort of stuff. Properly implemented negative feedback reduces distortion and improves performance without introducing audible artifacts. The notion that feedback inherently degrades sound is inconsistent with both theory and controlled listening tests. Bruno Putzies, sorry, I really have a hard time with this last name, Putzies, Putzeys. Bruno, who designed some of the world's most respected amplifiers, by the way, explains the following. The argument against feedback is based on a misunderstanding of its actual effects. When properly implemented, feedback improves performance in a way that are both measurable and audible. Wait a second. Both are possible at the same time? Bruno. Don't say that. This is like claiming that anti lock brakes make cars less safe. In reality, well designed feedback circuits and amplifiers reduce distortion and improve accuracy. They don't degrade the sound. What kind of nonsense is that? Modern feedback designs operate so quickly, in nanoseconds, by the way, that any theoretical timing issues are thousands of times smaller than what human ears could possibly detect. That's why virtually all high performance audio equipment uses feedback. It just works. How about tiny details being masked? Passion for Sound suggests standard equipment masks, quote, tiny detail signals. In the original video, when he talks about tiny detail signals, he's referring to very quiet, subtle sounds in music recordings that he claims, number one, contain important spatial and timbral information that affects how we perceive sound quality. Number two, are present in high quality recordings but can allegedly be masked or made inaudible by equipment problems. And number three, include things like faint room reflections, spatial cues, and very quiet details that supposedly help create a more realistic soundstage and image. Specifically, he suggests that these, quote, tiny detail signals include the subtle reflections and reverberations that help us locate sounds in space, the micro details that define an instrument's character, and other very quiet elements that contribute to what audiophiles call air and space and separation between instruments. His claim is that equipment with timing issues, specifically what he calls excess capacitance, I hate this word too, what he calls excess capacitance, will stretch out audio signals and cause these louder stretch signals to mask or cover up the subtle quiet details, even though both pieces of equipment measure the same in conventional tests. But research on masking tells a very different story. I talked about these two researchers previously, Zwicker and Fastel. Well, they're authorities on psychoacoustics as well. And here's what they say. Temporal masking occurs when the masker and maskee are within approximately 200 milliseconds of each other. Beyond this window, no masking effects are observed. In simple terms, for one sound to mask another, they need to be within about 1/5 of a second of each other. The microsecond differences Passion for Sound talks about are thousands of times smaller than what could possibly cause audible masking. It's like claiming you cannot see a mountain because there's a grain of sand in front of it. The scale is just completely wrong. But can we train our ears to hear the impossible? One point of the video got partially right is that listeners can improve with training, but there are limits, just as we know there are limits in everything in nature. There is a study about this. It's by Olive and colleagues, let's just say. There's a lot of them. Trained listeners showed improved consistency in their judgments, but did not demonstrate an ability to hear details beyond normal psychoacoustic thresholds. Training improved attention to existing perceptible differences rather than expanding the range of what could be heard. Think of it like training for sports. Practice makes you better at using your existing capabilities, but it doesn't give you superhuman abilities. Training helps you pay attention to real differences that are already there. It doesn't let you hear things that are physically impossible to detect, which is exactly what Passion for Sound would have you believe. So why does all this stuff really matter? What's the point? Our hearing is truly amazing. I mean, we are amazing creatures. Every creature on this planet is somewhat kind of impressive, except for snakes. Don't find them impressive. But everything has well-researched limitations. That's why we have research to begin with. When claims like those in Passion for Sound's videos are tested under controlled conditions where listeners don't know which equipment they're listening to, the magical differences disappear. It always happens. And as I mentioned several videos ago, when you do a blind ABX test, you have no better than a 50% chance of guessing correctly. That's a flip of the coin. Do it enough times, you'll be 50% correct on average. That's not having super abilities of hearing or perception or anything. It's just reality. All this stuff matters because people are spending thousands of dollars based on claims that don't hold up to scientific scrutiny. Your ears are incredible instruments, but they're also easily fooled by expectations, visual cues, and the power of suggestion, which is all the brain's aspect. Next time somebody makes extraordinary claims about audio equipment, ask for evidence from properly conducted blind tests. Or, in other words, how about just ask for evidence? Evidence outside of information that's being regurgitated among subjectivist audiophile forums. And also by people like Passion for Sound, who, again, is just propagating myths, misinformation, and disinformation. When people like Passion for Sound make claims like these, they say it with some kind of authority. They convince others, and other people who choose not to do their own research, their own investigation, will simply believe whatever sounds right to them, even if it's total bunk. The problem with subjectivists is that they champion their ears more than science. Their feelings about something matters more than facts. If they kept those beliefs to themselves, it wouldn't be a problem. But they go out of their way to try to convert others. Their nonsense compels people who don't know better to spend money on things that don't matter and don't work. So why did Passion for Sound make that video? Well, look, he could have made it for a variety of reasons. He could have made it because he truly misinterpreted what he read. And if that's the case, then he really needs to learn reading. Or he did it because of some other reasons. In my opinion, I think he did it because he knows people are speaking up about the non sequitur arguments from subjectivists. More measurements are coming and showing that there are no differences among DACs, and those DACs are basically the same thing, just copied and stamped into new chassis. Proper A/B tests, when conducted blindly, when conducted at least volume mashed, they don't show the differences that these subjectivists are constantly talking about. If there are measured differences, they are very likely below the hearing threshold, which is something I've been talking about over and over and over again. I've already shown people years ago how to do that for $25, and here we have these guys spending hundreds, thousands of dollars on gear and not having $25 in their back pocket to maybe just get a passive switch box and a couple of cables to do these tests properly. Well, maybe they don't. Maybe these people don't have the money because they've just wasted it on things that don't matter. This is why I'm so upset with the audiophile community, especially subjectivists. Look, I don't think objectivists get a free ride either. There's a lot of stuff that they say is kind of out there. But subjectivists have this ability to distort reality. It's not that necessarily they're out to do it to hurt anybody. And I don't imagine that Passion for Sound's intent was to hurt anyone, but it certainly seems to me that he was out to make a point of some sort, a point that was not supported by science. And in fact, a point that's been debunked by science. It's nothing new. A lot of these studies from 1990, the early 2000s, the 2010s, 2012, 2018, and these scientists, these researchers, these articles, these treaties, these textbooks that I'm talking to and are cited down below in the description section are still valid authority. They haven't been overturned, as we would say in the legal field. Let me give you an example. As a lawyer, I look at a lot of cases. Every time I research something, every time I have a legal issue, a factual issue, I have to go to the original source. And that original source in the realm of law would be looking at case law relevant in that specific issue. For example, if I had a client who claimed that the police busted into his house and did a search of his house without a warrant, I'd have to take a look at the facts. I'd have to take a look at what he says happened. I'd have to take a look at the police report. And then I'd have to find the case law which supports that the police officers violated the law. Now, in this very simple answer, this very simple example, I would know exactly where to go, and I would find that case law. I would get the citations. I would put them in my document where I filed my motion to dismiss. And quite frankly, that would be showing support for my claim, my authority, my argument. But subjectivists never do that. They don't point to the actual expertise. They don't point to the actual information. They may read it, but then misapply it. They might read it, not be happy with it, and then turn it into something else. I can't tell you exactly why Passion for Sound did what he did, but I can tell you without any shadow of a doubt that it has some very unfortunate consequences. For example, a lot of people who watch his channel now believe that he was correct, and further, believe that their imagination is far more important than actual reality. And that's what it comes down to. A lot of these people are imagining differences. I don't really have a problem if they keep that to themselves or even amongst their little groups. I do have a problem when they use that as an excuse to promote gear. And ultimately, I think that's where I want to end it, to talk a little bit about promoting gear. If you look at Passion for Sound's description section of this particular video we're talking about, he's got a ton of gear he wants you to buy. And every single link is an affiliate link. And every single thing leads to merchandise. This guy wants to sell. And it's really hurtful to business, isn't it? When you have experts telling you that what you're selling is complete junk, telling you and others, people who watch you, your prospective customers, telling them that this stuff does not matter as much as you, the salesman, claims it matters. And yet, you have to make a business. You have to earn a living. You got to make money. And if YouTube is your sole or primary location of income, that's a danger. When facts reveal that what you're selling is snake oil, that what you're selling is not true, that what you're selling doesn't make the type of differences that you claim they make, people will stop buying from you. People will stop clicking on your affiliate links. People will continue to ask more and more and more questions. There will be more doubt. Doubt about the equipment and doubt about your veracity, your credibility. So how do you combat that? Well, you could create an atmosphere of misinformation or disinformation. You could misread information that is readily available. You could interpret it in a way that is completely bogus and outrageous, knowing full well that the people you're targeting are the people who will not research, are the people who will not question, and are the type of people who are looking for affirmation, and you're giving it to them. The very first comments on that video from Passion from Sound are from people who were looking for confirmation, for affirmation of something that they truly believed. And now, Passion for Sound did it for them, gave them confirmation and affirmation in a way that makes them believe that they were right to begin with. But they weren't. They were wrong back then, and they continue to be wrong now. This is why I make these videos, to help you find the way to combat this nonsense. You're probably not going to read all the citations I have in the description section. You may not read any of them. Maybe you'll read the documents that are provided in the Google link. Maybe you'll go read the original article that Passion for Sound misused. And maybe you'll read my analysis of what happened. But even if you don't do that, at least you know one thing. Life is complicated. Our biology is complicated. But there are things that we understand. Things that we have been studying for decades. Things that we have limits to. And when it seems like somebody, a salesman for example, is leading you down a path that doesn't quite feel right because it's outside the normal experience of your life, you can at least start asking questions. And just by asking questions like Socrates did, you will find out very quickly that the individual who's trying to sell you this bunk doesn't know anything. And the person who supports that bunk also doesn't know anything. I invite all of you to use your critical brains. I invite all of you to challenge these woo-woo practitioners. And I encourage you to tell Passion for Sound and his supporters they haven't won. Nice try.